We need to say our names or anything? Or?
Yeah, please start by saying your names.
I'm Leanne Rock. I'm the daughter of Max and Margaret Weekly. I grew up in Bourbon and spent my life here until I went to college.
And I'm her dad, Max. I've lived here practically all my life, except a couple of years in the Army. 1 year in Plymouth, I think. Right? And it's, in my book, Bourbon hasn't changed all that much. We about 1,500 population when I was a kid, and we're still.
I'm Margaret Weekly. I'm Leanne's mother. In 1942, we moved from Etna Green to Bourbon. The first time I remember Max was when I was living on the farm north of Etna Green. I was a little girl, and he used to come out there with a marauder who delivered gas and oil. And I can remember him coming out one time with him, and I really thought he was a nice-looking gentleman. So that's my first memory. Then back in '42, we moved to Bourbon, and I finished high school here. So from there on, I'll let them start, and then I'll fill in.
Mom, one time you told me a story about you guys roller skating down Main Street. Tell me that story.
That's right. We lived in the north end of Bourbon, and on out from us, there was two kids, a boy and a girl. They used to put the roller skates on and come in, and I'd put my roller skates on, and we'd start going south. That's when 331 was newly paved. The next house south of us was a girl, so we picked her up. Then from there on, we gathered several. We skated clear south of town to where Elizabeth Marshall lived in the historic house, and we used to play whip. In other way, we'd take hold of each hand and we'd skate as hard as we could, and we would whip the last one around, hoping they didn't fall. Now that's my skate story. Then we'd go back home. That was our activity. Didn't cost us anything, only energy.
How old were you, Mom?
I was probably about in the 8th grade, 9th grade, 8th grade, I'd say, about the 8th grade when we done that. But you didn't have the cars and trucks that we have now. They were very few at that time. People couldn't afford them.
Dad, I know you were a little boy when the school burned. But you said you remember Grandma taking you out and looking up the street and seeing the school burning?
Well, I would probably, I was 2 years old. School burned in 1928. And where we lived, we had a sawmill across the street. And I remember it was night, evening, and I think my dad was night watchman at the sawmill. And he come over and told my mother that the schoolhouse was burning. And I can remember she carried me out in the street in front of the house, and we could see, we couldn't actually, you could just see the red and the burning. But I can remember her carrying me out into the street. I watched, more or less watched it burn for, I think that 1928. December.
Cool. You remember a lot of your teachers, don't you?
Quite a few.
What do you remember about school?
Well, I got bullied. One teacher come in and shook me up. It was noon hour, and I'd went home for lunch, and when I come back, all the kids were sitting in their seats. And I come in, sit down, and I turn around and ask, what's going on? Everybody's in the room. The teacher come in and she shook me and said, I told you to be stay in your seat and be quiet. A button flew off of my shirt, and I didn't sue anybody, I just lived with it. And I had another teacher, I don't know whether she liked me or not, but she told me I was the best male typist in her class. Of course, I was the only male, they were all girls. She told me I was the best male typist in her class.
Did you say that you had Mrs. Mendel 2 times?
I had her in the 3rd and 4th grade.
How about going to her?
And when she was in Grace Village, I went and she was 106 years old. And we went and had a visit with her. And I took her picture, a class picture of her 3rd and 4th grade. And she was good. She, health-wise, maybe her eyesight and hearing was a tad bad, but she sort of remembered me. And she told us at that time she was ready to go. And a month later, we went to her funeral.
When did you weave rugs? Because I remember you said you used to weave rugs.
Well, I don't really, it seemed like it was in the grade school, 5th or 6th grade, and I don't.
So, one of my favorite stories is, or another favorite story is, because I know you like chocolate and everybody in town knows you like chocolate.
Sort of.
But you used to get your money and go buy chocolate and go to the library.
Well, in Bourbon, it's mainly, I think, in the winter time. In the summertime, all the farm families came to town, and Saturday night was a big night in Bourbon. They had band concerts, the stores were packed with people. And I think in the winter time, people still come to town, but I would go to the dime store and buy a dime's worth of chocolate and go across the street to the library on Saturday night. And I'd sit in there and read and eat chocolate. That would be on Saturday night. Was a big night in Bourbon back then.
So how'd you get your money?
Well, sometimes my folks give me an allowance, and then about once a week, a neighbor lady would come to the door and knock, and she'd say, "Max, will you go for me?" And she'd give me a dollar bill and a nickel. And I would come uptown, and I would buy $1 worth of cigars for her. And then she'd give me a nickel for making the trip. And I could buy back cigars back then. I didn't even need ID. Just went in the store and they'd big wooden box. They'd take about a half a dozen out and give me the rest. I'd take them home. And she never smoked out public. Had an outside toilet. She'd go out there and you could walk by and smell it. Then her husband, I know I helped him, I don't know if he paid me, but once a week he had a truck and he'd go around town picking up their garbage. And I would sometimes help him. Peg leg badge, he had a wooden leg. Peg leg we called it.
Did you guys both work in the onion fields, or did you work in the onion?
Yeah. Weed onions. I think I got 10 cents an hour.
We would go during the summer season when onions, but Roy Banna lived over north end of town, but we would walk to his house in the morning and he would load 10, 15 of us kids in the back end of his truck, and we'd go to the onion marsh on the other side of Etna Green. Now, we all rode in the back end of that truck, just not strapped in or nothing, just climbed in. And I think I made 10 cents an hour in 1 week. I came home and I opened my envelope, counted my money, and he overpaid me. He lived about 5 blocks from our house, and I went back and I told him, I said, I think you overpaid me this afternoon. He said, no. He said, you have been such a good worker, and I just wanted to award you a little bit.
That was nice.
Now, did he lie to me, or did he? But we rode in the back end of that truck, so that'd be not safe today.
Tell them when you worked at the bowling alley.
Well, that was another job. All these jobs I did were my younger years. Right now, I can't find a job.
You're not looking either.
But we had a bowling alley, and I'd set up pins. Back then, we set up pins, wasn't automatic, but I got 2 cents a line for setting up pins. That was another way I made money, but that was later, after. When I come up here to the library, I was young. And I helped farmers bale hay in my high school years. Baled hay. One time we lived in the country here in Bourbon. And we had a big 2-story house we lived in. And I painted that for the landlord, and he gave me a whole month's rent free. That's what he paid me. And we paid $25 a month rent. And I got that whole month free for painting that big 2-story house.
But the house was not modern. You had to go outside to the government privy. So it was pretty cold in wintertime.
So Mom, when you moved to town, when you moved from Etna Green, did you move into the house that Grandma and Grandpa lived in on Main Street?
Yes.
And what
It
did
had 13 rooms in.
Grandpa do then?
Worked at Studebaker's.
So when did he start the salvage yard?
Oh, I don't remember what year that was. I don't remember. My dad was a man of many trades. He always worked. And I can say that about Max. He always worked. He always had a job. Whether it was his original job or helping somebody else in order to make money for a living for our kids. We didn't always have modern conveniences until we could afford them. In 1954, we moved from the farm to Bourbon to a modern house that had an inside toilet, but we had stoves for our heat. And that's the year that Leanne was born.
So I remember, when I was little, I remember when I would ride my bike down to Grandma and Grandpa's, the hotel. When did the hotel, when did that, because I know once upon a time Bourbon had a lot of people coming for the horse races, like from Chicago and the depot and everything. So when was the heyday period of?
Well, I don't really remember seemed like the hotel, do you know any dates? I think maybe 1938. But people used to come to town from Chicago by train.
So, like, the hotel that I remember I always thought it was haunted and everything because it was deserted. When did it close?
I think maybe in the late 50s or something. But see, way back, you could rent, I think I've got an ad here, the hotel, $1 a night. And I think if you wanted to include bath, it was a little extra. I've got the ad in here, but
After it closed, though, they used to hold dances in that hotel in the summertime. And that's after I moved to town in 42, because I used to go to the dances at the old hotel.
See, we had, I don't know, quite a few passenger trains that stopped and people come to the fair and the train bunches. But you could have a round trip, Chicago and back for a little over $2.
I remember the horse barns that used to be out on the curve, and trucks used to miss that curve and run into the horse
Yeah.
barns all the time.
See, there's horse barns and filling station out there, that's Pete Perry and his wife had a filling station there, and the day Pearl Harbor was bombed, it was Sunday morning. And I don't know why I didn't go to Sunday school, but I was out there. I had a big bottle of Pepsi Cola and a bag of Planters peanuts. I poured in the Pepsi. The Pepsi was a nickel and the peanuts were a nickel. And we were sitting there drinking our pop, talking. My brother was working when they came over the radio and said Pearl Harbor was bombed. And that was a nice day. I rode my bike back home, told my folks. But I remember, that was a nice Sunday morning.
Were you still in school, or had you graduated at that
Oh,
time?
I was still in school then. That was 1941. I graduated in 44.
Okay.
So I was about 15 years old.
So then, after you graduated, you went into service that next fall, is that right?
That fall, yeah. Shortly after school, I went into service a couple of years.
So Mom, did you work at the grocery store when you were in school, still in school?
I worked at the telephone office when I was about a junior in school. And after that, I went to the grocery store, which was Kroger's, where the restaurant is now. Used to be a Kroger store. And then after we got married for a while, I worked at Joiner's. They used to have a factory just south of the railroad track where the Legion is now, before they built the big building out on the west end of town. I worked off and on for Joiner's here in Bourbon. Then they moved to Warsaw. And that, I don't remember what year it was. I started working for Joiner's in Warsaw and worked there until I went to Donnelly's in '65. But when I worked at Joiner's, where the Legion is, I made 25 cents an hour. And if I worked nights, I made 35 cents an hour, and I really got rich, because that's the most money I ever made working.
Well, when I got my first job, I worked at the Dairy Queen for 75 cents an hour. So, and I thought I was rich. My first check was $7.50.
Then after all that, during the winter time, if I needed money to buy the Christmas presents for the kids, I went to work for the 5 and 10 cent store, where part of it is where the church part is now. On the north side used to be a 5 and 10 cent store. And that's where I worked during the Christmas season to make money to buy money for our daughters' Christmas.
I remember that I used to go there, and when you first went in the door, they had that big glass candy counter, and then the candy up on top was like a penny or whatever. But the one thing I remember is one year I had to go there after Christmas because you told me that Santa left something there for me. And another thing I remember buying there one time, besides 4-H material, because they sold everything, was squirts. That you had ordered some squirts for Diana and I, and we had to go there and get our squirts.
But I worked at the candy counter when at Christmas time. That's where the part that I worked.
I wish they still had candy counters like that.
Well, I reading an ad here, in my notes, Christmas candy. I forget how many different kinds, but it said 10 cents a pound. Christmas candy. You buy Christmas candy today and it's 8 ounces, $3.95.
So most of the, sorry, Dan. Most of the time, I remember when I used to go shopping with you, you used to buy your groceries at Limler's, right? Didn't you shop
Yes.
there most of the
Joe
time?
Limler had a grocery store where the beauty shop is now on Main Street. I started out, it was Kroger's, A&P, then we had a hardware store, then we had a dime store, and I don't remember for sure when the grocery store went there. Then the next store was a jewelry store, and I don't remember the next building, but then we had the tavern, then we had a paint store, and then we had a bowling alley, all in the first block north of the stoplight.
So the bowling alley is where I remember where the laundromat used to be.
That's
there.
right, that's right. And in the next block, I really don't remember, but I know there used to be a funeral home, Robin's Funeral Home, and after that it was Limler's grocery store. The next was a telephone office, and that's where I worked when I was a junior in school. And they used to get a ring, and you'd plug a plug in, and they'd tell you what number you wanted, and then you'd plug another number in, and then you'd pull one long or one short, two long, two short, in order to transfer the call to that plug. Very interesting.
When Linda was in high school, you used to chaperone the dances above the fire station all the time.
That's
Who sponsored those? I mean, because they were every week, I think.
every Saturday night. Mrs. Britton, Neoma Britton, and I used to babysit, you might say, for the high school kids to dance on the top part of the firehouse on Saturday night for a couple hours. I don't know, maybe longer. But they used to have a dance up there, and we'd babysit so the kids could dance, have a place to go.
So it was just because nobody
That's right.
really sponsored it or anything.
When we were still out on the farm, at the end of, south end of where the firehouse is now, our doctor, one of Bourbon's doctors was Dr. Graham, and he had his office there. It was a little white house, and that's where he had his office. And I can remember coming in from the farm and going there and getting medicine and stuff when we were sick. I always had a sore throat. He always swabbed my throat out with Argerol.
What you think about that?
Well, I was just reading a note here, way back, got an air meet in Bourbon, and we used to go to them, the fair, they'd have these air shows, Bourbon, and 30 airplanes be there, but you could go there, and my dad and my brother, they'd always go for an airplane ride, and I didn't trust, but you had to pay a penny a pound. If you weighed 75 pounds, you paid 75 cents. See? But I always liked airplanes, but I was afraid that my dad would take my brother, and it was a penny a pound. I can remember that.
We're about done.
Were you old enough to remember when your grandpa was like the marshal or sheriff or cop or whatever in Bourbon? Do you
Well,
remember him doing that?
I remember my grandpa used to pick up mail at the post office and take it downtown, or down to the railroad, and they had an arm there at the railroad. He'd hang that bag of mail on that arm, and when a train come by, they'd grab it.
Really?
And they'd kick a bag of mail off, and he'd pick that up, take it to the post office. But he hung it up on this hook, and the train would go by, and they had an arm and grab it. then I think he did work in that tower too. There's a depot. And then my uncle, Walt Sharp, was cop.
Oh, he was the cop, I had the
Yeah.
wrong one.
He was cop for quite a while.
When did Uncle Carl open his shoe store in Bourbon?
I don't remember the year, but he had it quite a while. I don't really remember, but I don't know, we had a big pickle factory in Bourbon too at one time, Heinz Pickle Factory. It was out west of town where the root beer stand used to be. A great big building, Heinz.
Well, wasn't there, was the music college, was that down by Grandma's or was that out by our house?
It was down by Grandma.
What was out by our house? I thought something used to be out there, out in that field. So was the music college, was it gone, like, when you were in school, or?
I think when I was a little boy, the building was still there, but it wasn't a college. And they had like a dormitory there. And I had old Mount Bear or somebody lived there, and one night when we was a little kid, that thing burned. It had about 2 blocks from our house. Seemed like it burned.
So when you were talking about the places uptown, like Murph's, did it used to be kind of like a restaurant too, or just, I mean, it seemed like it seemed like at the end it was just kind of, you went in and bought newspapers, but didn't it used to be more than that?
Back then, like when I worked in Warsaw, we would stop in there like 6 o'clock in the morning for morning coffee. And there'd always be a grunt, the Bourbon cop, and everybody and their brother went there for coffee.
And for gossip?
Well, we didn't gossip.
Oh.
It's sort of against our rules. But all the guys would meet, and it's mainly coffee, rolls.
Was it kind of like the first Quick Mart type thing though? I mean, didn't they have, because it seemed like it seemed like you used to buy like ice cream and
Well,
stuff
you
in there
could,
sometimes.
yeah, you could. And I think you could maybe buy maybe a quick, but I never bought ice. To me, it was just mainly coffee in the morning to talk to the cop and different people.
So you said, because I remember like when, like out on the curve out there by 12th Road going west, that was, I don't know what it was before DX, but you used to work at that gas station and then they moved it uptown. But you said that there used to be a lot of gas stations.
Oh, we had probably 17, I think. Isn't that right, Heather? 17 gas stations. And we had at least 4 or 5 grocery stores. But gas stations, I seen an ad here, there's one south of town that I don't even remember, but I got the ad, 6 gallon of gas, 93 cents.
Wow.
Don't forget the pool hall. We've got a pool hall.
Pool hall.
Is that behind where the corner restaurant is now?
That was just north of Murph's building,
Robin's Nest
Oh.
in.
where Robin's Nest is now.
Because they used to play pool or cards or something behind where the restaurant is.
That was later on down the years after it went off of Main Street.
Yeah, we had a whiskey store in there too. But see, the restaurant used to be a grocery store, I mean, a long time ago. And Chevrolet Garage.
Yeah, I remember we used to always go down in September when the new Chevys would come in, and you always used to take me down there and we'd see the new cars.
See, one night, we come uptown, Admiral Byrd, I don't suppose any of you know Admiral Byrd. He was an explorer, and he built a great big snow vehicle. And he was traveling to the South Pole, and they came through Bourbon.
Really?
And that thing was bigger than any semi. I mean, it was a big, I got a picture of it. But a snow cruiser or something they call it. But he was en route to South Pole, and wherever they went, they come through Bourbon. And I remember going uptown and seeing that come down 30th. Great. Almost like a building on wheels.
Wow. I remember when you were working at the gas station, you said the Hollies, they were a rock group, came through,
Yeah.
filled their bus with, or they stopped for, I don't know, anyway, they stopped at the gas stations.
Well, I worked by 4 different gas stations during the time. And I delivered milk in the town of Bourbon. One woman, she's got a business now, haven't since, but she remembered me as a milkman. She said I was the only milkman around that would break ice off and give to the little kids. We packed her milk and ice. When I stopped at her house, I'd give her ice, pieces of ice. She still remembers that today. Now that, nice people remember you for
Well,
something.
it's 'cause you're a nice guy, Dad.
I think so. We've been married 68 years.
I'm finally getting the hang of it, whatever you get.
The things that it makes me really sad is that nobody seems to have recipes for Evie's cookies. Because I remember I used to ride my bike, downtown, and I didn't get Evie's cookies at home, but Grandma England oftentimes had them in her cookie jar. And I just remember they were like this big, and I loved the sugar cookies because they were so soft and crumbly. And then the black walnut cookies, I loved them. And somebody posted on Facebook recently a recipe that they think is an Evie cookie, and I haven't tried it yet, but I really hope it is, because I just loved those cookies. And then after they were uptown, then did Bainey's buy it and move it out north? Is that where it went?
Out behind her folks.
Right.
In the building my father had.
And then I think they still sold them at Amish Acres. They baked them over there and sold them.
Well, Max had an army buddy that lived up at Osceola. And they used to come down on Sunday afternoon. And his wife, she just couldn't believe that he'd sit there and eat almost a whole pack of Evie's cookies. That's one reason he come to see Max.
Yeah.
And that's after they got out of the service.
But there were only, the package was only like, what, were there
yeah.
a dozen in there? Maybe
A
not
dozen.
even a dozen?
Yeah.
They had a dozen in a bag.
Yeah, they were,
Yes.
they were noted. And see, one of the drivers that used to deliver those cookies around the countryside stopped at Murph's for coffee in the morning. So I had coffee with him too.
So you got Evie's cookies a lot.
But and Johnny West, the cop, he always coffee. But I don't know. Evie's cookies were.
Well, the building that Evie's Cookies was in the north side of where the Subway store is now. They had an Evie cookie there, and they had an Evie's cookie one time on the east side of 331, but I don't remember just for sure where it was at.
Well, there's a bakery right across the street, north of the telephone
Right.
office.
Well, Robert Crick had that, a bakery in there.
And I used to go in there, that bakery north of the telephone office, when we worked in the Onion March, on the way to get a ride to I'd stop into the bakery, and I wasn't cheap, but I'd ask them if they had any burnt cookies. And they would give me a sack full of burnt or chip cookies. And, I wasn't.
Broken pieces.
Or I would buy a big roll for a nickel. But I always specialized in asking for any burnt cookies. And I wasn't cheap, but I just tried to save, 10 cents an hour, you don't really spend big time.
Now tell one more about your rat, and then we'll go.
Did you have something to add about your cookbook, though?
Go ahead.
Not really. I mean, it's just, not really.
Oh, okay.
It's okay.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
I had to eat these cookies. Well, you know what else? You're talking about grocery stores. When Dillingham's went in, do you remember that Norma had that store up above and
That was
like,
clothing store.
right, twice a year, those big sales that she would have, and people would just go crazy because it was such a good deal. I remember getting lots of clothes from there. So, Dad, tell us about your rat.
Well, to make a long story short, this guy had a filling station about 3 blocks east of the light, and I run around with his son. We were classmates. And this one day, I went up there, he was gonna take us swimming. And there's a tornado, cyclone came up, bad storm, and we were inside that building scared to death. And all of a sudden, I felt something in my pants. And I told his dad, and he come over and he grabbed it. He said, I think it's a rat. And he shook and he squeezed that thing, and finally he said, I think I got it. And he shook it and it fell out the bottom of my pants leg, and it was my glove.
That was in 1937, and I lived on the farm north of Etna Green. It took all of our windows out of the upstairs, and rain come in. My dad took us to the basement, and the basement was dry when we went down, but when we come back up, I was wading water waist high. And we got to go to Grandma Mealik's in Etna Green and spend the night because our beds were all wet. That was 1937, but I don't remember what month that was. In the summertime. It done a lot of damage around.
But that was my story of the storm, that's my rat story. And I didn't save it, but people get a honk out of stuff like that. And say, I'm serious. I just telling it like it is.
Okay.
All right.